I'm sure we all remember the first day the ultralight craze began, and sometime later, Glorious had introduced what I would consider the ultimate package for the average consumer, offering a lightweight mouse complete with RGB and their first take at a paracord-like cable. It became evident that Glorious wanted to disrupt the market. It's been a long time since the Model O entered the ring, and this time around, I think Glorious is aiming for perfection. Today, we'll be finding out if the Model O wireless from Glorious is a critical hit or a terrible miss. But before we get started, I just wanted to make it clear that this unit was sent out for review by Glorious, but you should know that all opinions here are my own, and this does not affect my review in any way. My name is Thankyou, and this is the Model O wireless from Glorious. Coming from the original packaging of the Model O way back in the day, I'm sure many people will be pleased to know that you won't have to suffer the nightmares of your cable getting damaged due to the packaging. Considering this is wireless, you're simply presented with the mouse and wireless base immediately after opening the box, safely sitting in its place with no cables to be found in uncomfortable positions. Glorious packaging has always been rather minimal. Accessories include the USB-C cable, wireless base, and dongle, along with a sticker and the typical paperwork instructing you on how to get acquainted with your mouse. The sensor being used here is what Glorious is calling the BAMF sensor, in partnership with Pixar, their own proprietary sensor. There's been many people claiming it could be a rebranded 3335 or a modified 3370, but I have no way of confirming these claims. Even taking a look inside of the mouse, instead of the usual sensor name being etched in, you'll only find the words BAMF etched in its place. Using this mouse alongside my G305, G Pro Wireless, and Ponage Ultra Custom, performance feels on par with those from a gameplay perspective. The mouse does use a 2.4 GHz connection though, and the DPI maxes out at 19,000. DPI steps range from 400, 800, 1600, and 3200 by default. DPI steps are indicated by an LED found at the bottom of the mouse. To my knowledge, there's no way to change the polling rate without software, so you'll be playing at 1000 Hz by default. Not a bad thing, but for those who want to squeeze every ounce of juice they can out of wireless play, 500 Hz is a must. Before we dive into the software though, you should know that the software isn't required after you've set up your mouse to your liking. Huge props to Glorious for this one, as I'm normally the type of person to set it and forget it. Additionally, the mouse includes some instructions on how to change lighting modes and brightness, all without software. Taking a look at the software, it's nice to see they've moved on from the previous flat appearance to something with a more modern and minimal design that follows the new look of their website. The software gives you a decent set of options. In the first tab, you're able to adjust the 8 preset RGB effects, while also being able to adjust the RGB color shift rate and brightness intensities for wired or wireless. Moving into the second tab, you're able to change the mouse binds for things like multimedia, macros, shortcuts, or you can disable buttons completely. Finally, the third tab gives you the options of removing or adding DPI steps and adjusting the colors of these steps. Additionally, you can also adjust lift-off distance from 1mm to 2mm, along with making adjustments to your debounce time from 2 milliseconds to 16 milliseconds at the far end. Polling rates can also be adjusted here from 125 Hz, 250 Hz, 500 Hz, and 1000 Hz at the max. You can also adjust the LEDs for inactivity, sort of like a sleep mode, which disables the RGB completely from 1 minute to 15 minutes of inactivity. This is a setting hidden behind the settings icon, by the way. The only real negative I can give for the software is that there isn't any indication of the battery life percentage. All you're given is a battery icon with segments of the battery that you have left. I've spoken with Glorious about this already, and they're working on it. Battery life is obviously important for a wireless connection, especially in a competitive setting. The last thing you want is your mouse to die in the middle of a game, and in my use, I never ran into any issues like this. But I do want to be transparent here. Originally, I thought I had exact numbers on battery life, but there was a flaw in some of the notes that I took, so I'd like to apologize for not being able to provide accurate numbers on battery life at this time. The last thing I want to do is mislead people, so I urge you to check out other reviewers' thoughts on this for now. However, the good news is, while Glorious does estimate around 71 hours of use with the RGB off, I am able to confirm that you could potentially squeeze even more time out of this mouse using a 500 Hz polling rate, as the 71-hour testing was down at 1000 Hz. Now before we get into the buttons, here's a quick sound test. Mouse 1 and Mouse 2 are solid here, using Omron switches rated for 20 million clicks, the same switches used in the original Model O. Clicks feel light and tactile, while having a low pre-travel and a slightly higher post-travel. There's near zero wobble or play with mouse button 1 and mouse button 2. Really solid work here by Glorious. The side buttons here are using Huano greens, and while clicks feel light in use, they do have minor pre-travel and a fair bit of post-travel to the side buttons. The coating here is a glossy one, and while I've never personally been a fan of Glorious side buttons, it's super easy to rock my thumbs into the buttons. They're always within reach for me using a claw grip. I typically prefer some thicker side buttons, while these do sit a tiny bit on the thinner side. The DPI switch at the top is also coated glossy, while the power switch feels like a raw plastic, which is located at the bottom of the mouse. The Model O wireless scroll wheel uses an F-switch green encoder, while the original Model O used an F-switch red encoder. The scroll wheel here feels very smooth in use, while the steps are subtle but defined. The switch used here is also a Huano green. The scroll wheel rubber itself doesn't feel great in my opinion, and it gets oily rather fast when looking at previous usage with other Model O's. The shape of this mouse is low at the front while relatively flat, which then dips in the middle and has an extended lower back. The Model O is typically compared to the FK series of Zowie mice. The mouse shares a matte coating across the whole body, ignoring side buttons and DPI switch, which are both coated glossy. Coming from the original first batch of Model O's, this new Ascended cable is a night and day difference. It doesn't feel nearly as stiff or rough as the previous cable, while also being much thinner in comparison. It's also USB-C, which I hope we see more of, but there's a minor problem here. Although the cable here is USB-C, it can only go in one way. If you take a look at the cable, you can see the side with the icon facing upwards as the proper orientation for plugging the cable in. This is the case for the mouse itself and the wireless base. This would be totally understandable considering how something like the G Pro Wireless executed its front plug, but I don't think it really makes sense to have to worry about plug orientation in regards to using the wireless base. I could definitely see a few customers accidentally busting their cables in an attempt to push it in, but thankfully, I inspected the cable's molding before pushing any further. The underside of the wireless base has a rubber bottom that should hopefully stick to your desk. Back to the cable itself though. I think for a stock cable, it'll get the job done. It feels much looser and not as heavy as the new G-Wolf stock cables. You'll definitely want a bungee for a cable like this. It's nice, but it seems like it can get caught under the mouse pretty easily for any low-sense players out there going for big flicks. The feet used here are the G-Skates from Glorious. They're pretty thin, but they're pretty solid for stock feet as well. The Model O wireless weighs at around 70 grams according to my scale, and around 75 grams with a bit of cable. Solid weight for a wireless mouse, only a minor increase from the original Model O. This time around, I think Glorious has seriously nailed it, at least with my copy. Squeezing all along the sides, I can't hear or feel any flex. The shell feels really solid here. Adding extra weight from my palm and pushing down hard into the front buttons, I can't seem to make the mouse creak or crunch in the slightest. Although my only experience with the Model O was a first batch unit of the original O, I'm happy to report the build quality here has much improved. Getting inside of the mouse is pretty tricky, but it's mostly identical to taking apart the original Model O. You'll find 2 screws under the rear mouse feet, and from there a small prying tool allows you to pop open the sides. After you've opened it up, take extra care not to get too excited just yet. You'll want to unplug the RGB ribbon cables and battery cable, along with the cable connecting the side buttons to the rest of the mouse. And for any curious modders out there, the Model O wireless PCB shares the same size as the original Model O PCB. The molding of the top shell and bottom shell might appear similar to the original Model O, but there have definitely been some changes here. The PCB also appears to be held in with a single large screw at the back and some pegs. I think Glorious has set the stage for wireless mice and what you can expect from them with future releases. Despite the many issues with Glorious and quality control in the past, it's refreshing to see a company actually trying to address their problems while also having their hands in as many communities as possible, whether it's keyboards or mice. I'm hopeful Glorious will continue to find ways to provide consumers with reasonably priced stuff and quality in mind. I'll be excited to see how well Glorious executes their next attack on the mechanical keyboard market. As always, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video, and I seriously appreciate your feedback. It means a lot. There's more on the way. There's always more on the way. and I'm hopeful that you guys will enjoy what's coming up next. There are so many new releases on the way, and there's so many releases I've already missed, but I'm hopeful that I can tick every single one of them off of my list. And please, go ahead and watch other people's reviews so you can get a general idea of how well this mouse performs, and try to develop your own opinions.